This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Jervette R. Ward, who teaches in and chairs the newly reestablished Department of Black Studies at the City College of New York. In addition to her writing and editing work on African American literature and popular culture, she serves as president of the College Language Association. In this conversation, we discuss the relationship between Black studies and literature, how the past struggles to establish the field inform ongoing Black liberation struggle, and how past and future Black studies work engages with community life and its everyday habits, objects, and complex practices. Hello, Jervette. How are you today?
Hi, John. I'm great. Thanks for having me here.
Well, welcome to the Black Studies Podcast. I'm really happy that you made the time to talk with us. I've been looking forward to this for a while. We had corresponded a little bit and finally found some time that worked for both of us. I think your work is really interesting. You know, you're the chair of the Black Studies Department, president of the CLA. And so, you do so much work that's really essential to the field of Black studies. And just, I really appreciate your time, but I'm also really excited to have your voice as part of the series. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I definitely couldn't turn down a fellow U of M, Go Tigers graduate. So I try to look out for us.
I know. We'll try to not talk about whether we still hate John Calipari and the cult and religion that is Anthony Hardaway. But if we get there, we get there.
But I bleed blue, so yes, go Memphis.
Me too. As I was saying when we were talking before, my kids are like, why do we have this Memphis t-shirt? I was like, put it on.
That's good parenting right there, John. Good parenting.
We can talk later. Well, obviously, I want to hear about your work. I want to hear about your vision and imagination of the field of Black studies. But I wanted to start really asking you a different question, which is more personal, which is what drew you to the study of Black life? What is your origin story as someone who studies Black life in the way that you do, and also to the field of Black studies? And what sustains your relationship to both?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. And my journey to Black studies, Black literature, African American literature is one that I think started probably a little later than what I would have ever desired and what sometimes people expect. So my parents very much care about education. And of course, they came of age where their schools were being integrated and desegregated. And so my father, also a U of M graduate, so second generation,
like that.
made my parents together made a decision that they really wanted to think about where they chose to send us to school. And they sent all five of us to private school our entire lives, which was a huge sacrifice that I greatly appreciate from them. Yet the reality is, so born in Memphis, but moved to Pearl, Mississippi, right outside of Jackson when I was 7 years old. And the reality of what my parents were seeing for education, they were concerned about putting us into public schools in Mississippi. And so we went to predominantly white private schools pretty much our entire lives. And one of the schools where I did 7th through 12th grade is what most people would call a segregation academy. So it was one of those schools that was set up following the integration, desegregation of public schools in Jackson, Mississippi, when all of the whites fled the school system and then took a lot of the resources with them to establish these white academies. And so I attended Jackson Preparatory School, and I went there 7th through 12th grade. And for a good bit of the time, I was the only Black girl in my grade of like 130 something people. The year that I graduated, of the 8 Black people in the school, 4 of them were my siblings. So we would joke and say that we were 50% of the Black population, which was true of a school that was almost 1,000 people strong. My father actually went on to become the first Black person on the board of directors of Jackson Prep. And Prep, I received an amazing, very traditional education. But I can also say that I left Prep knowing so little about African American life, history, and culture, even being in Mississippi. I just had the privilege of going down to Jackson State for the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer over at COFO's headquarters. And I was there for the 50th as well. And to be in that space and to have studied with those individuals is so special. But I left Prep not knowing who Fannie Lou Hamer was, not knowing who Medgar Evers was, any of those things. And so when I got to the University of Memphis, and I specifically chose University of Memphis, not Mississippi State, not Ole Miss, because that's where everybody went from Prep. It was like the 13th grade. And I wanted Black people. I wanted an opportunity to be exposed more to those opportunities. And so I got to the University of Memphis and I started taking African American literature classes, classes that I had never taken before. And I got to read all of these amazing texts, whether it was going to Sister Souljah all the way to, the classics of, Douglass's slave narratives and things. And it rocked my world because I was a journalism major, and I ended up doing minor in English, and then I later came back and did a PhD in English Literary and Cultural Studies with a specialization in African American Lit. And so for me, it was very much a college space where I was first exposed to. And I know so many who, of course, have the privilege and opportunity to read a lot of these texts in high schools and other spots. But I didn't. And in particular, I think about like my dissertation, which was on Hurston and Dunbar. And I chose it because I was interested in linguistic patterns. Because having grown up where I grew up, I was constantly told by Black kids and white kids, you talk white. And I was like, what is this? Like, what is it to talk white? Like, no, I'm Black. Like, I am unapologetically Black. And so I wanted to look at texts, Seraph on the Swanee and The Uncalled, which were two texts by Black authors written in a dialect that featured white people. And so like taking this inversion of looking at sociolinguistic patterns. And that really, it was a very personal journey of looking at these texts and trying to understand what people are saying in this. And then I think the last part as I finish that question is I'm sustained by a love of my people. I'm sustained by the beauty, the brilliance, the absolute commitment to equality and the assertion of our humanity. It never stops amazing me. It never stops impressing me. And it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful, unnecessary struggle. I don't think that it should be there, but I respect the commitment to it.
Yeah, I mean, writing on Hurston for a dissertation will infuse, how you imagine the field and how you imagine and think about and connect to these questions with real, like, the pleasure and play of, like you said, language, right? Rather than it's not just an analysis, not just linguistic, theory, the actual play of it in literature. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah,
also love being reminded. I love being reminded too, because this is one of my favorite questions in this series. I mean, people have such interesting ways of telling their way into the field, and the impact of books. It's one of those things I worry. Yeah, I think probably every aging person worries about young people in reading, but I worry about the loss of that connection to books because of the way books get so deep in our imagination, but also in our imagination connect, as you were talking, right? Connect to the very meaning of who and what we are as people, but also reframe, as you were, you started, reframe like how I experienced myself and wondered about myself. Maybe you didn't say doubted yourself, but maybe had that critical question of like, who am I in relation to language, the books, get inside those questions and get inside us.
I mean, books are powerful tools. I mean, I think about, Ray Bradbury. People don't burn them or ban them just because they don't think they have power. As we're just coming out of Banned Books Week, I think about a teacher that I had at prep, one of my English teachers, and I think she saw something and noticed something, but I think she was also struggling with what to do about it. And so she gave me a text by a Black author just for me to read. So this is separate from everybody else in the class. And my entire class is white.
Yeah.
And so she's like, I think you should read this text. And she gave me a Hurston text to read. And I think we also ended up reading together Jubilee, Margaret Walker Alexander. But I remember thinking, why just me? Why isn't everyone in the class reading this? Like, Black literature is very much for us, by us, but it's not only us. And I think about all the ways that I had to read, Steinbeck and Hemingway and all of these other folks. I'm like, why aren't we all reading this Hurston text? Why are you just giving it to me? And I'm thankful she gave it to me, right? Like because it wasn't there was no Black literature on the rest of the curriculum. And so it did start. That was one of the little sparks that I had. But I think about all that my classmates missed, all that they should have, and
I like that way of framing that. Yeah, and I think I'm teaching a seminar this semester on Angela Davis, and we were reading the autobiography, and I didn't yell at my students, but I think of it as like a preschool. I was like, if you don't read this, you're missing out on like somebody telling you this incredibly important story. And actually one of my students said, I'm so glad you insisted that we read it, which is funny because that's what the syllabus does. She was like, this is really intense. She's like talking about being in prison or knowing these girls who died in the Birmingham church bombing or being in Germany. I was like, yeah, that's what books do. But it's real and it's beautiful, those moments of connection, because it's transformative.
Yeah, they absolutely are. I think about when we talk about prison industrial complex, like it is pervasive across times and generations. Just the couple weeks ago when I was at COFO and hearing from Ms. Fannie Lou Hamer's campaign manager and wow, those who were at the Mississippi Democratic Party who were part of the delegates with her, and hearing them talk about being in prison. So one of the women who shared a jail cell with Miss Hamer was there a couple weeks ago with me. And so hearing her talk about like what being in that cell was like, the abuse to their bodies, and we think about what's been happening in the last few years and the rise of Black Lives Matter. Like, this is a long continuation of navigating and dealing with police brutality and imprisonment of Black people.
Wow, what an amazing conference! So I feel like I want to go back in time and find my way down this. Sounds amazing.
Oh, it is. It was. So the NEH did a really cool project for the 50th anniversary where they chose a group of scholars to be in residence at Jackson State, at COFO. So this was for me kind of a return to hang out with that group for the 60th. And one of the things I'll tell you kind of funnily, we decided to start a spades tournament in the after hours in the COFO rooms. And there were a whole group of people who, of course, were like clutching their pearls and like, oh my gosh, I can't believe y'all are playing spades and eating pizza in COFO. And several of us were like, what do you think they were doing? The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the rest of these folks in their after hours. You think they really were just sitting around here like this, prayer hands, all this? No, these are students.
Seriously. Young people have young people stuff.
Yeah. It's like, I was like, us having a spades tournament is in honor of their rest and resistance.
I like that. Yes, absolutely. It is in honor of. I love that. You should have had that film. That would have been a great sort of side documentary to the.
Oh, well, you know what? We actually have documents. So I was actually just with the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Jackson State, who was a part of the spades team. I actually faced him and his partner in the finals of the spades tournament. And he claims that they won, but we have a bracket system and I have a copy of it that I show that we were in the final. I don't show who won, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask how you did, but, you're a literary scholar. Documentation matters. Go back.
Right. I'm like, I'm not a historian.
read between the lines,
Yes,
metaphors.
they won. I will be a graceful loser. I was very proud to come in second to them now.
There you go. Well, let me, speaking of sort of honoring and thinking about 50th anniversaries, it's been 50-something years since the founding of Black Studies departments. And part of this podcast actually came out of my own disappointment and my collaborator Ashley's disappointment that the 50th anniversary at our institutions of the founding of Black Studies came during the pandemic, right? So part of this is sort of series is asking about, how do we imagine the field today, right? 50-something years later. So I want to ask you that, and I'm specifically wanted to ask you how you imagine the field of Black Studies in relation to this tension that's at its origin. The tension being the call in the initial moment of the founding of Black Studies to study Black life, that disciplines hadn't done this work. And so then there's the question, how can this work get done? To study the intellectual tradition, to deepen it, the appreciation of it, to extend it. That intellectual project is at the heart of the founding of Black Studies, but also at the heart of the founding of Black Studies is a reconfiguration of the relationship between intellectual life and Black liberation struggle and that militancy of that struggle, which changes the relationship between community and campus, between intellectual and the people. And that's been this tension at the heart of Black Studies, I think. And I say a tension, it's not necessarily a contradiction. But, we're 50-something years later, and so I always want to know how people imagine the field of Black Studies, specifically in relationship to this origin, which is 50-something years ago, which kind of a long time ago. But also, these are issues that continue to animate us as professors and thinkers today.
Yeah, no, it's so amazing to think of all of the Black Studies departments and programs that have been created over the last 50 years. So I think about, of course, what happened coming out of San Diego State and like this brilliant, movement and build up of peoples and things. And one of the things I was just talking about was how even the founding of my department is looking at social justice movements and things in other spaces. So they were looking at the American South. They were looking at these others, places across the world where people were fighting for equality and equity and social justice. And so I'll answer your question by localizing it a little bit to my department as a way to kind of kill two birds with one stone in some way. So Black Studies came about at the City College of New York, which of course is the flagship of CUNY, the City University of New York, which is the largest system in America with the largest number of students. And City College, CCNY, exists in Harlem. That's where we are, which is an amazing, beautiful thing to think about Black Studies in a space like Harlem, a place that, we saw Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and Nella Larson and Jessie Fawcett and, all of these amazing writers, thinkers, scholars. But in 1969, you had a group of 10 students, Black and Puerto Rican students, who were kind of fed up with the curriculum, with the makeup, all of those things of their institution. It was white, 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 white. And so they issued 5 demands to CCNY, to CUNY, demanding that things change. And the very first demand that they put out, demand 1, was a separate school or department of Black and Puerto Rican studies. That was the very first demand that they issued. And then they had 4 others that were there. And of course, they were completely shut down, rejected, not even engaged with. And so because they were looking at these social justice movements in other places, and they specifically talked about what was happening in the American South, they ended up holding the campus hostage for about 17 days. And this is called the takeover. And so this happened in 1969. And from this movement, you have the establishment of the first Black Studies department here in the CUNY system here at CCNY. And that was an amazing moment. And that moment, of course, is now documented in the new film, The 5 Demands, which just premiered on PBS last month. And so we're really excited to see that film spreading across the nation to tell this story of the creation of the department. But the story does not end there. So just a few years later in 1996, CUNY disbanded the Black Studies department that had been created in 69, which was around the time of all of these other departments, of course, being created. And so for the last almost 30 years, there hasn't been a Black Studies department in Harlem at CCNY. At CUNY, the flagship right here. And so I was brought last year to reestablish the department. That was what I was hired to do, was to come in and navigate through the CUNY bureaucracy. I'm sure you've probably heard there's just a tad bit of bureauurocracy.
Employs a lot of people. That's what I told myself here at the University of Maryland. It's a lot of
a little bit of bureaucracy. So I was brought in to reestablish it. And so that's what I spent the first year doing, working with students, faculty, staff, going all the way through the CUNY Board of Trustees. And as of July 1 of this year, 2024, we officially have a Black Studies department again. It had been a program, which is what they had devoted it to for almost 30 years. And so when I think about that timeline, when I think about that trajectory of what happened and the idea that a Black Studies department would be reestablished in the age of Trump, in the age of the dismantling of DEI, and the age of, AP, AFAM, lit and history courses being, taken apart. It is even more imperative for us to do this work and to resist inside of that. And it was really interesting. May 4th of this year, I know because it also happens to be my birthday. May 4th it falls in the time frame of the 17 days of the takeover. And this year was the 55th anniversary of the takeover. And we had a group of Black Studies students who, when they realized the date and that there had been nothing planned by the larger CCNY of CUNY system, they took it upon themselves to plan an event to honor and commemorate those 10 students who had started the takeover. And it was amazing because it was also happening as our campus was on shutdown due to the Palestine protests. And so they had planned this entire event. And then when we got shut down because of the Palestine protests, they had to find another location. And so we were thankful that the Maisels Documentary Center in Harlem opened up their facility to us. And those students brought in the people who were still remaining, who were still alive from the 1969 protests, their children, their grandchildren, community members, all of them. We packed out the Maisel Center where they got to stand with and learn from and honor the activists of 69. That's what I think Black Studies is for the future. It's those activists who started this, inspiring this current generation to keep the struggle going, to continue shining a light on the oppression, the inequality that exists, so they can continue helping to build this not only beautiful academic discipline, but also social justice discipline. So that is kind of what I'm seeing, to see these students looking back to be inspired towards the future.
I love that. First of all, just a quick note that I'll put in the text that accompanies the podcast, a link to the film, which you had sent me, and it is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Like every Black Studies department needs a film about itself. I really believe that. And that's what I came away from that thinking, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. Andrea Weiss as the producer director, and also happens to be a colleague. She is amazing. Jezebel Productions led it. And they used a lot of students from CCNY to make the film. And she always laughs. She and I have kind of a almost standing Taco Tuesday hangout. And she laughs about how, the police they were really helpful with the creation of this documentary. She's like, we wouldn't have the footage that we have if the NYPD hadn't been, filming and documenting themselves of what was happening in 1969. So the film doesn't just have like people talking about it. It has real footage from what was happening. And yes, it's streaming on PBS. We also are in the middle of a film tour of going to campuses and giving talks about it. So if campuses need inspiration on it, let us know. We're available.
We'll get you here. Actually going to get you here. So we'll make that arrangement separately. But also, first of all, it was a wonderfully told, response to this question. I love that. And what was interesting to me is as I was listening to you talk about like the demotion of Black studies in Harlem, I really did have the two responses that you were working with. One is, well, these are students who deserve to study Black studies. Mm-hmm. But I was also like, this is like a political atrocity. Like, this is a political aggression against Harlem and its history, which of course this is the origins of Black studies, is right? To try to have a different relationship to both of those things. So that's a really, it's like the story fitted to the origins in that really amazing way. And as you said, it opens up this way for students to start to think about the past is actually helpful for our present. I mean, I'm not happy that we're in a moment where all of this stuff is getting banned, but we are, and the past actually does have instruction. So,
and atrocity is the perfect word. I mean, the idea that we are in the birthplace of James Baldwin, right? Like that we are. There's a famous picture of Langston Hughes right in front of the building that the Black Studies Department is moving to, our new suite, where he's hanging out with a group of friends. And Shepherd Hall is the name of the building, and it's just like, come on, Langston was right here.
Yeah. We can't. Places. Well, let me shift a little bit and ask you about your own work. Your work is a mix of gender studies, popular cultural studies, edited some work on really interesting stuff, and literary methods and sensibilities, which is your PhD. And so I'm interested in how this sort of combination of approaches that allow you to think about, study, write, and reflect on Black life, how you think of that as a part of the tradition of Black studies, but also what new horizons you think it opens up that aren't a part of that past.
Yeah, I think Black studies is such a practical discipline. I think so many people ask, like, the question, especially of the humanities, what are you going to do, with your degree? And Black studies is inherently disciplinary, like it's an interdisciplinary field in a lot of ways, because we have scholars coming to the space of looking at Blackness through whether it's, psychology, sociology, literature, history. We all speak to each other in different ways. And in some ways, it's kind of what happens with the work that I do in popular culture. So the PhD that I have is in English Literary and Cultural Studies, and I love that. And I think your question, or even your comment about how books are so powerful, the fact that they take literature and culture and put them together, I was like, yes, that's what I want to do, because they speak to each other, and we can't understand a people, society, a place without looking at the culture. And so, for example, my edited collection, Real Sister, Stereotypes, Respectability, and Black Women in Reality TV, I remember when I started working on it, it was very much coming from a very practical place. I was one of those people who was just like anti-reality TV. I was like, oh, that's beneath me. I cannot imagine, ever watching this stuff. Just trash. And I have 3 sisters and a mother. And one of the sisters was over at the house, and she was watching, I think, one of the Real Housewives. And I, of course, was like, that traditional academic of no, never that, how dare you. And then I found myself just kind of moving over and watching a little bit more. And the next thing I know, you're not on the couch eating popcorn, watching and commenting. And
it's inevitable. You can only resist so much. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then as a scholar, though, I was watching these shows and I was like, oh my gosh, like, there is something here, and it's so pervasive. I mean, whether or not you've ever seen the Kardashians, everyone knows who they are, and they're coming to us from, from reality TV. I would even argue, the rise of Trump was influenced and helped by his time in reality TV on The Apprentice. And I remember talking to my dissertation advisor at the time, and this was right when Married to Medicine was about to air, and one of the main characters is from Memphis, and she was being asked to do an interview with the local Fox affiliate, and we were both talking about like this idea of talking about reality TV as Black PhDs, like what would that do for, careers and images, because no one was touching it at the time. And I very much was like, no, there's something here. And I got together a group of scholars from a variety of disciplines: business, history, child and family psychology, English, all of them, for us to look at how Black women were portrayed in this area. And we needed to, because reality TV is so influential. It is how people are making decisions on beauty. It's how people are making decisions on fashion, even education. I was giving a talk at a conference about it, and a gentleman from Atlanta, who's a professor in Atlanta, was talking about how they'd seen their numbers of students seeking to enroll in Atlanta colleges and universities directly correlate to the rise in Atlanta-based reality TV shows, that so many students were coming expecting to have a Love and Hip Hop Atlanta, a Real Housewives of Atlanta, to have those Hollywood Exes Atlanta, to have those types of experiences. And if this is influencing where people are choosing to go to college, where they're choosing to make major life decisions, we as scholars have a responsibility to interrogate and to critically engage with that space. And so that was part of what I wanted to do with that project. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of how I've approached most of my work. It's whether it's the work with sociolinguistics and Hurston and Dunbar or anything else, it's been this idea of what is practically needed for the field and for our people. And that's the work I love to do.
And, I mean, I think about how much of the canonical, I know that's a fraught term, but sort of canonical work of Black studies either is or draws on everyday life.
Yes.
Right. And whether it's, you're talking about Hurston, I mean, she's documenting everyday Black people. She's not just documenting, what a professor somewhere said about another professor. Right?
That would be boring as hell. No. Well, I don't know. Some faculty meetings.
Myself, I say ironically as we're talking professor to professor. But
yes, please don't think we're boring, guys. No.
But the sort of relationship between Black studies and the everyday lives of Black people, I think is such an important feature of the field, but it is also a part of the field I think we don't name as such, because some of those things just, they get handed down to us. And, you start to talk about jazz, or early blues music, and you're talking about Bessie Smith, or you're talking about Louis Armstrong. It's, it's important to remember that used to be popular music. There used to be the reality television of the 1920s and 1930s. And so there's something to be learned there about not that these were everyday objects, so, that people interacted with, to put it in a kind of sterile way, but that there's wisdom in that there's insight to be drawn from that, and there's meaning to be drawn from that. So I love that. I think Black studies opening that up. And as you said, English departments, literary and cultural studies is so much actually what English means in English department these days. That's a easier fit, I think, than a lot of other disciplines. So
yeah, I remember giving a talk once on Hurston, and but it was right around the time that Real Sister was also coming out, and I just kind of mentioned that I thought that Hurston would have been not only a huge fan of reality TV, she probably would have chosen to go on reality TV if they gave her a chance. I mean, if we think about her autobiography, and I'm using air quotes, Dust Tracks on a Road, I mean, reality TV, we all know, is not fully steeped in reality, right? Like, it is very much edited and produced, and there's a narrative and a goal. And Hurston was kind of doing that same thing with her autobiography. I mean, it is loosely based on her life in some ways, where she took a lot of creative license with this autobiography. So I could have seen a Zora Neale Hurston, Real Housewives or something out there.
featuring on a few episodes Richard Wright.
Right. Oh, that would have been
the letters they exchanged about who's the good writer, who's the bad writer, all of that. So.
Or with Mulebone and Langston, to be able to document that battle, or with Godmother and the influence of white people inside of the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, this is like a whole season right there.
See, this is where, sort of futurist fiction, science fiction, and reality television need to merge, and people need to restage these stories for us. Well, let me sort of extend that question and ask, how has, that you're chair of Black Studies and that's your academic field and your teaching field, how do you think being in Black Studies, not versus English, but in relation to something like an English department, changes your approach in the classroom?
Well, I think I was already changing as an English professor. So I spent the first decade plus, I guess, being based in English departments, but teaching African-American literature inside of them. And I was already moving towards, I think, a more digitally and project-based type of work, even with my students. Like, I think about when I last taught Baldwin, and you can see this on the teaching section of my website, where my students made a short film, Our Voices This Time, based off of The Fire Next Time. And I really have been thinking about what are the practical ways that we should be teaching, because I know you and I grew up in the age where, the 20, 30-page paper, like that was the thing that everyone did. But it's kind of like, are people needing that anymore? Is anyone even reading that anymore? What are the mechanisms and the methods through which our students should be showing us their knowledge, and how can that knowledge be practically used where they could have it on their CVs, their resumes, in their portfolio, so that they can synthesize and show, hey, I've read The Fire Next Time. I have critically engaged with this on race and culture and all of these different things. But now I can take this, instead of writing this, 30-page paper that just might sit there and no one ever look at, how can they take that and write a script or write tweets or something that could then be so that it could be disseminated out to people. And so one of the projects that my Mississippi State students did right before I left was that short film where they engaged with the text. And this was, of course, during COVID. So we're making a film across like 25 different computers at the same time. That's the type of work that I think I was already moving towards, that I was able to bring into the work that I'm doing in Black Studies, so that our students can leave this space not only being more intellectually sound, but also so that they can be prepared to get a job, because I do support and believe in our students being able to pay their bills.
Yeah, I know it's pretty common among humanities professors to sneer at I need to get a job after this, but I'm like, we have jobs. That's why we're sneering. Getting a job is important.
It is incredibly important.
I grew up in a money-panicked household, so I'm like, it's a little triggering for me when people are like, who cares about jobs? I'm like, a lot of people, everybody, in fact.
Right. I'm like, give them yours then.
Yeah, there's that too. I mean, I love this insistence on the expansive practicality of Black Studies. I mean, there's a previous podcast with Nathaniel Normant where he raises the same kind of question and response about, I would say, as a side note, I was my son's composition teacher in college, which was pretty cool. One of the original people at Temple Black Studies. I love it. But anyway, Normant was saying, this is thing about Black Studies. It's for everyone and for everything. And I just really love that. And I love it when this theme pops up in these podcasts, because I think to take that really seriously is important, right? As you said, really important for how we think about how we make a classroom and make assignments with that in view. I like that.
Oh, yeah. It's incredibly important. I'm so thankful that there's so many across the field who are sharing and joining in this work of practical application for our students.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a couple of final questions and start off. We've talked about these amazing things that Black Studies does. Let me ask you this question: what is the thing you think Black Studies has not done particularly well?
The same thing we've been talking about, being practical sometimes. I think that we, like a lot of the other humanities disciplines, have often gotten caught up in either the academic jargon or even, I wholeheartedly, of course, support the social justice work that we're doing, but also just thinking about the realities of making sure our students can eat. That they can have a place to live, and that we are thinking about the human that is a part of the humanities first and foremost. That is the thing. And like I said, I think this is true across the humanities. I do think that Black Studies does it better than some other disciplines, but I do think that we have a ways to go and some growth that we could do as well.
I really like that because I think in some ways the origins of Black studies, around whether it's intellectual tradition or Black liberation struggle and the relationship between those two, is so much about like how do we think about how do we actually appreciate and land ourselves on this notion of Black humanity. But that's an expansive notion because it expands into the kinds of things you mentioned right there. Like how do we think about they eat, where they live, that they have a future. Yeah. Well, let me ask then, as a sort of concluding question, what do you think is, and maybe that's it, but what do you think is a question or the topic, the issue you think we should all be thinking about, the question we should all be asking as Black Studies scholars?
Oh, that is a good one and a hard one. You're gonna go out with a bang here.
Tell us what to do.
I would say, how do we love and care for people? Because I think that's the heart of Black Studies. The heart of Black Studies is about, when we talk about Black liberation, it is about Black people being able to be free and to be able to live in the fullness of their humanity. And so the fullness of our humanities, that is the ability to be intellectually curious, the ability to be socially curious, all of these different things to exist in all the ways that we want to without limits, without oppression, and to be fully committed not only to our liberation, but I think to whom much is given, much is also expected, the liberation of all. That, I think, is our greatest calling, is to remember each and every human and their value, their worth, and to love, honor, and protect that.
I think if the question of what it means to love is at the center of Black Studies, it's going to be all right. So I really love that place. I love as a place to conclude this conversation. And Jervette, I really appreciate you making the time. This has been extremely interesting and a lot to think about, and some really moving parts to this that I think people listening will really feel compelled to think really hard and rethink and deepen our relationship to what we do as teachers and as writers. So thank you for that. This has been really a fantastic conversation.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. And thank you for how you are elevating and shining a light on Black Studies. We need it. It's a useful tool, as we also, as all departments are fundraising and all of those things. So we thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, anything Ashley and I can do to get people to take Black Studies seriously, both with love and with dollars, we're absolutely here for that.
Oh, John, I like that, love and dollars. That might be, that sounds kind of Isaac Hayes's.
Or maybe the new Black Studies reality television show.
Love and happiness? No. Love and dollars? No.
There you go. Well, have a great rest of your day. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.